Ursus arctos horribilis, the grizzly bear. Evolving from the small forest bear Ursus minimus, the grizzly bear first began to differentiate from the Etruscan bear around 2 million years ago in the continent of Asia. Through the formation of glacial land bridges, Ursus arctos migrated throughout Asia and entered Europe and the Americas, with descendants of those first bears still being found on these three continents to this day. Speciation began after their ancestral forests began to grow much cooler, eventually being replaced by alpine tundra in the northern continental areas. By adapting to their harsher climate, Ursus arctos eventually gained an elongated snout to better forage for food and became larger and more muscular than their ancestors. Today, male grizzly bears can reach heights of up to 8 feet tall and weigh anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds, making them the second largest terrestrial predator on Earth. The typical grizzly bear grows to reproductive maturity within 5 years of birth, but this can vary greatly due to diet quality and temperature. A typical litter ranges in size, being anywhere from 1 to 3 cubs, with reports being as high as 6. However, these claims are hard to prove, as grizzly bears have been studied to adopt abandoned young and raise them as their own. On average, female grizzly bears will breed every 3 years, but the interbirth interval can vary greatly depending on maternal maturation and litter loss, leading to a range of anywhere from 2 to 8 years. Female grizzlies invest a lot of energy into their young, providing for and protecting them for typically 2.5 years after birth. With all of these variables, it gives grizzlies one of the slowest reproductive rates among terrestrial mammals. However, due in part to this heavy investment, grizzly bears have become a highly adaptable species, able to survive in almost all natural northern habitats, being found anywhere from wetlands, coastal lands, Arctic and alpine tundra, high mountain forests, and grasslands. If there are sufficient energy sources and a cold season lasting at least 3 months, there will be grizzlies. Due to this high adaptability, they are also quite nomadic as a species, with home ranges of 150 to 600 square miles, varying by gender. While typically sedentary, they tend to be non-territorial with one another. This does not mean that they don't fight, as males of the species fight to show dominance during mating season or over food that a larger bear wants for themselves. Despite being the apex predator in every range that they are found, grizzly bears are omnivorous, with a propensity towards plants. In fact, about 65% of their total diet consists of roots, fruits, nuts, and grasses, with the other 35% coming from protein sources consistent with the habitat that they are in. This can range from salmon and small rodents to larger prey such as elk, moose, and caribou, or any carrion that they can find. A typical food web will put grizzlies, wolves, and cougars at the apex of a trophic cascade. But this does not actually mean that they are in direct competition with one another. In fact, in a study done in 2013 by William Ripple, it was found that in Yellowstone, by reintroducing gray wolves, the elk population plummeted due to predation, thereby increasing edible vegetation for the grizzly bear population, leading to an increase in grizzly bear production. This means that although elk are prey to the grizzly bear, they are in fact in direct competition with them for what makes up much of their diet. However, this isn't to say that wolves and grizzlies don't compete, as in that same study it is shown that the two species will fight over carcasses, wolf-killed or otherwise. However, cougars will tend to avoid both as much as possible. Another interesting interaction is the shared ranges of the American black bear and North American grizzly bear. The two species' spatial and temporal distribution were influenced by seasonal food items, with grizzlies sticking to areas with larger protein sources and black bears adopting a more vegetarian diet. Grizzlies were also found to change their activity profiles, switching from nocturnal to diurnal by the season, depending on availability of young elk. Whereas black bears were exclusively diurnal to avoid the predatory nature of these grizzlies. Habitat selection also varied, with male grizzlies preferring non-forested habitat areas and black bears preferring the opposite, heavy forest with not much ground cover. From the study, it was found that black bears tried to avoid their larger cousins and can do so by adopting a more herbivorous diet. This PVA was initially difficult to set up, since, as adults, grizzly bears almost never die. With an average of 97% survival rate year to year, the only thing that typically kills them is either old age or a bad human interaction. However, their juvenile survival rate is much lower, ranging from 54 to 14%, surviving into adulthood. By adding this juvenile survival rate into my equation and not as a separate graphical model, we end up getting an extant population, when, by themselves, the juvenile graph ended in extinction. Due to the pressure on grizzly bear populations, there isn't much data on carrying capacity, so I had to use data from a PVA done in 2006 on the Kodiak Island population to make mine. With this PVA, we can determine that although year to year there is great variation in survival and reproductive success, the Kodiak Island grizzly bear population is extant and safe, when not accounting for other pressures they may or may not be facing. Adding this juvenile survival statistic into my equation, and not as a separate graphical model, does lead to an extant population. The PVA, however, gives a statistical model that the main limitation on grizzly bear populations is the high mortality rate of their young and their slow reproductive rate. Grizzly bears play an important role in any ecosystem that they are found in. As a keystone species, they have a positive effect on their environment should they be allowed to thrive. Through predation, they regulate populations such as elk, moose, and smaller pest species. They also keep forests healthy by dispersing seeds and berries through their feces, like birds and other small herbivores. Finally, as opportunistic scavengers, they eat and digest dead animals, quickly returning those nutrients back into the ground. The destruction of the once great ranges of the grizzly bear is a travesty on the same scale as American bison. However, it is much less talked about. Human pressure and habitat destruction continue and will continue to be a major pressure on all bear populations, which could lead to the loss of not just these bear populations, but also much of the large animals of North America.